Wow. Can I just say that if my teachers 35 years ago, I'll be quite generous when I'm talking back, and I said to them that I'd be standing here today, I can assure you it would have been no chance. My experience of school was very mixed and very challenging. I came from an area in Scotland that was referred to then as an area of priority treatment. What that basically meant was that it was very poor. So as we travelled through our lives in Castlemilk, Chateau Lay, as we prefer to call it now, there was absolutely challenges upon challenges. And when you are a young girl and you are trying to find your place in society, and a society who has clearly said what you should do and what your role should be, you battle against that. And when you're in a school, as I was, which is a very, very large school, St Margaret Mary's Secondary School. Hello, anybody that knows St Margaret? Oh, hey? It wasn't 30 odd years ago, was it? No? Oh, golly. Maybe that's one of my teachers there. But it was a fantastic school, and John made a point this morning which really struck a chord. He said about what we will remember, and what I remember about my days in St Margaret Mary's was two teachers. It wasn't the subjects, it was the teachers. And they really embraced the difficulties that I had living up in a poor home. You know, where for me, school holidays were a time of dread, because you didn't get a school meal. And that's a reality. It's not meant to be a sob story. But when you're in that environment, you need your teachers. You need the people in your life to be able to give you that comfort. I have worked for the past 24 years with vulnerable and high-risk girls who need that level of support and level of comfort. And that should never fall to one discipline. It has to be to all disciplines, to take our girls and work with our girls as best we can. I am going to start this presentation with a rather sad note, and that is one that many who've heard me before will recall that I use, and I do it for a very deliberate reason. I don't speak to you as an academic. I don't have papers or letters after my name. I speak to you as a practitioner. And I speak to you on behalf of the vulnerable and high-risk girls that I have worked with for over 20-odd years. In the early hours of the 5th of October, the early hours of the morning, 2009, John spoke about that phone call that you get. And as deputy head of a secure unit, which I am, I'm just currently seconded to the Centre for Youth and Criminal Justice. But I am actually the deputy head of the Good Shepherd secure unit down in Bishopton. And I was to receive that phone call, and when you are on call, you know that when you get a call at 2 or 3 in the morning, that it's not going to be a good call. But I did not and could not have anticipated what the content of that conversation would be. It was to inform me of the death of Niamh Lafferty and Georgia Rowe at 14 and 15 years of age. They had decided that the world was too cruel a place to live, and they committed suicide jointly, throwing himself over the Erskine Bridge. What followed for us as an organisation was quite devastating, as the media and a lot of other people looked to point the finger of blame. And it should never have been about that. It should have been about what decisions the girls made and why, and what could we have done collectively to have stopped that from happening. We can't bring those girls back. They did make that choice. Can we use some of what came up in the fatal accident inquiry to stop it happening again? I suggest we can. But we can only do that if we agree that social work, education, health get together and embrace a whole systems approach. GIRFEC has been absolutely one of the best and refreshing things to be introduced to Scotland. Why? Because you don't need to be from a rich school or a rich family. It embraces everybody. It embraces all cultures. But let me take you on a wee bit of a journey to understand what vulnerable and high-risk girls actually means. And what are the challenges for us? For me, girls are the only ones who can love you at the start of a sentence and loathe you at the end of it. Yeah? They have that ability to just turn something very personal and it makes it a challenge. I travel all over Scotland delivering a 2-day training programme that I wrote called Getting It Right for Girls. And it's all disciplines. I didn't write it with a specific discipline. And I travel all over the country. And whether it's the police, education, health or social work, they consistently say it's much easier to work with boys than it is with girls. And there's probably a few people in this room that would share that, yeah? So why is that? What is it about girls that bring about in us a bigger challenge? Some of my happiest memories of girls are working with girls, but some of my most challenging times are working with girls. So let's have a wee look at what some of the research and some of the theorists tell us that we need to get right for girls. What do we need to know and what do we need to do? The main issues affecting girls are self-harming. You'll probably be able to add to some of these with your experience. But this is what the research, and this is my experience as 20 odd years, and I say for 14 it's been in a secure unit, and these are the common themes and issues that come up for girls who are coming into secure care. Secure care, by the way, which has seen a significant increase in the amount of girls who are losing their liberty in the last year in particular, has gone up significantly. And it's not just on offence grounds, it's on welfare grounds where they're a risk to themselves. And the main reason for a referral for secure care is their sexualised behaviour. So we can see that there are some differences in gender already for the use of secure care. Trauma, sexual and physical abuse. One of the main things, and it was touched on earlier on, the Rotherham inquiry. We will always be haunted by the fact that so many people didn't take heed of a lot of what was going on, and there is a considerable sexual exploitation issue. I spoke with Alexis J just in September last year and spoke to her, and she says there's a sexual exploitation issue in Scotland, and unless we do something about it now, we will be featuring in a similar type of inquiry as the Rotherham. So we need to look at what that's about for our vulnerable and high-risk girls. Relational aggression is one of the key bits. If we don't understand gender and how it marries up with mental health and well-being, if we don't take gender into consideration, and one of the key things in taking gender into consideration is to understand how girls function in relationships. What is it that they're looking for in relationships? Violent behaviour. We are seeing an increase in girls who are demonstrating violence, but what seems to be happening from what is going on is that the threshold and the acceptance of the violence behaviour from boys is very different to girls. So when girls are violent, it's like they challenge the norm and they break the norm. So sometimes our response to it can be much harder and much difficult, more stringent on girls than boys, because girls technically just shouldn't be doing that according to society. Loss and bereavement. Studies have shown us that girls who are vulnerable and high risk have had multiple losses in their life, and that these losses are usually associated with fairly violent deaths in the family or suicides. We did a study at the Good Shepherd of a group of girls that were coming in whose violence knew no bounds, and they did not discriminate against who they were violent towards. Their self-harming was absolutely horrendous. They would cut their faces, cut behind their kneecaps and under their breasts were the common places. And this level was really for us very challenging, so we started to look into it. And we found that they had two main things in common. One, they had lost their mothers when they were very young, and secondly, their mothers had died as a result of suicide. So there was a common link, and we began to look at what that loss and bereavement and the residual effects of trauma. That's what we need to look at. We need to understand the causation of the behaviour for our girls and stop just looking at their behaviour. And loss and bereavement is a key part of that. Sexuality and sexual health. Again, we saw somebody referred, but I can't remember who, about that whole sexual health being introduced to school. I think it was in your workshop. You know, they need to promote this. How do we keep our girls safe? And if girls are vulnerable and high-risk girls are coming into our secure units, and the number one reason for that is their sexualised behaviour, then we need to look at how we embed that into our education systems. How do we talk to them about it? How are we introducing it so that it's not something that should be embarrassing? It's something that should be a natural part of learning. If you have children, do you not naturally talk to them about things? So why shouldn't we do that as teachers, and why shouldn't we do that as social workers, etc.? And the big one, the mental health issues. This is not to be confused by the diagnosis of a mental health condition. Mental health issues are about self-esteem. They're about anxiety, they're about depression, they're about low self-confidence. Girls will tell me, and I will be sharing for the next 15 minutes or so, the voice of the girls and what the girls are asking me to say to you. I always go and speak to girls before I come somewhere, and I've taken a lot of this from Corton Vale Young Offenders Unit. There's young women sitting in Corton Vale at 16 years of age. 16, serving sentences. I don't know what age the girls are who's in our group, but if you're around about 15, 16, can you imagine these young girls sitting in our prison environments? Something not right there. For the purpose of this small presentation, I will look at two key ones that I believe are the most significant in terms of mental well-being, because they have the biggest impact on mental well-being. And that first one is called relational aggression. I don't know if you're familiar with relational aggression. I don't know if you're familiar with relational theory. If you are, bear with me. And if you're not, then I hope that you find this useful in understanding certainly vulnerable and high-risk girls. The background to it was Nikki Crick, Dr. or Professor Nikki Crick, was an American researcher, and in the 1990s she went into nursery schools and she began to follow young girls from the age of 3 right up until the age of 21. So her research concluded saying that from the age of approximately 3 years of age, you could begin to see some indicators that there was going to be an issue about how girls related in relationships through the use of aggression. So these girls would tend to be ones who didn't like to share, or who would say, give me that toy and you can be my friend. Yeah? Or they would get another wee friend to say, go and take that toy off him or I'll not be your friend. So it was the use of relationships to gain something. And she describes it as this. She says that girls have not been found to be aggressive because we've looked at boys. So is that true? And if that's true, then maybe we are missing something in gender. Maybe what we need to look at is a different type of aggression. And we need to look at it because we need to understand how girls behave towards other girls. If we don't look at the aggression, the Mental Health Foundation in 2012 said that gender must be taken into consideration when we are looking at offending and risk of offending behaviour. And one of the key bits that Nikki Crick says is, if you don't look at this type of aggression, forget mental well-being. Forget it, because you will not meet the girls' needs. And I'll go on to show you what happens within an education environment in that. The majority of past studies and theories have been focused on boys because it's been that look at aggression in terms of how we understand aggression to be. And girls also get excluded when it comes to offending behaviour. The research tends to be on women, so they lose out because of their age. And then the what works material looks at what works for boys, so they miss out on their gender. And Professor Michelle Berman calls this the two stools. They're caught between. So we don't have research that shows us what works because it looks at boys, and we don't have research that looks at girls because it looks at women. So we need to start to address that as a country. How do we draw some of this research for our young girls? So Nikki Crick defines it as behaviours that harm others through damage or threat of damage to relationships or feelings of acceptance, friendship or group inclusion. And what she says is that girls will take something of value. And one of the reasons that it's difficult and sometimes more challenging to work with girls is that they do tend to make things very personal. I know certainly in social work, we often get girls that will say, hope you crash your car on the way home. I hope your house burns down. They tend to say things that are really very personal to you. And if you have shared some information with them about your personal life, then they take that and they use that. Because what is their goal? Their goal is to hurt you. That's their goal. And when they're angry, they want to hurt you. Boys, when they're angry, are very reactive when they're angry. They will have a situation and they will react to it. Girls are not. They will think about it. And an example that Bruce Perry who's a noted trauma specialist in America, and he goes out to like 9/11 and Waco, etc. And Bruce Perry talks about the difference in how girls' brain is developed. And if it's been impacted on by trauma, then there is actually a physical reason, and that is how the brain has developed. And he says that what happens is that you can be having, if you're a woman, you can be having an absolutely fantastic day at work. And you're just about to leave work and your boss says something to you, like, I'm really not happy with that report that you did, and I'll speak to you in the morning. So on the way home, what are you thinking? Oh, wait a wee minute here. I need to get this sorted. You forget that you had a good day. You totally forget that you had a good day, because what consumes your brain is the fact that your boss wants to speak to you the next morning. And what Bruce Perry says is you then go home, you start to prepare dinner, and the utensils get banged down just that wee bit harder than they normally would, because you're thinking about what's going to be said to you the next day. And then you go to bed and you're tossing and you're turning and you're tossing and you're turning. And what women are doing is actually using that part of their brain that says, how will I react tomorrow? What will I do tomorrow? And Perry says that men who experience that, it's a case of, no problem, I'll see you in the morning, and they leave. But women actually think about it very differently, and the exact same is true of girls. So they're very proactive in their thinking. She's identified this, which she calls, as unique to females. This type of aggression is unique. So again, I say to you, if we do not take relational aggression into consideration, how can we look at their mental well-being? How can we promote their mental well-being? If we don't take this type of aggression into our schools and look at it and understand it in our classrooms, the girl who just suddenly acts out, have you ever sat in your class and thought, I don't know why she did that? She was sitting there 1 minute absolutely fine, and then the next minute she was just began shouting, because it might have been something that happened 2 or 3 periods ago. It might have been something that happened last week. So you need to be careful when you're looking at the behaviour in your classroom that you try and understand where it's coming from. And that's what Nikki Crick tells us, this causation of the behaviour. She refers to it as a powerful weapon. It's just as powerful a weapon as physical aggression. Actually, one thing about Nikki Crick that I would dispute in my experience, I think name-calling, ruminating, verbal abuse, some of the use of social media is far more damaging than physical aggression. Girls tell me, Carole, it would be easier if I just get hit. But see, when they start to call me names and it's all over, I can't take that. I can't cope with that. So that's what they say is one of the big issues. And how does our schools actually deal with name-calling and this type of relational bullying? Leon Fulcher calls it the new bully in the playground, because it often goes unseen. So girls are not going about and physically hurting each other, but there are many different ways that girls will hurt each other. And unless we recognise what some of that is, then again, how can we put it into our policies? I don't know if you can make out some of this, but this is what Nikki Crick gives as relational aggression. And it's things like ignoring or excluding, not inviting, giving silent treatment. How many girls do you know that they do the whole cross-armed and roll the eyes when you're trying to speak to them? I'm sure that's maybe just me that's experienced that then. I'm sure it's not as big an issue as what I thought. You know, and other girls, they will spread rumours about someone because they're mad at them. And what she says is that these type of behaviours can have a significant impact on mental health. Because what happens is that actually girls don't want to go to school. They don't want to experience some of these things. Girls who are relational aggressors will very rarely find themselves in the criminal justice system. Do you know why? Because somebody else is doing their work for them. They're the ones who are controlling. They're the ones who get other girls to do things, and they stand back. So when you look at the behaviour and you see the behaviour of a couple of girls in your school, and relational aggression will be happening in every classroom, in every school. And when you look at it, just try and understand that there may actually be somebody who's sitting smiling at you at the side that is actually the main leader, but you don't see it. You just see the one who's shouting and the one who's causing some disruption. So it's important to know what correct means by that. Excuse me, before I do realise I'm in a room with a lot of teachers. Please don't run out with your red pens and take that "and" off there. That was a wee error. I meant to take that off. So I was looking at it and I thought, where did that "and" come from? So what are some of the concerns around relational aggressors and actually some of the victims of relational aggression? The peer rejection. What happens with girls is that eventually the ones around them, they get tired of doing everything that they're being asked or told to do. They get tired of feeling the way they're feeling, so they do turn on their aggressor. And their aggressor often finds themselves very lonely people. You know, and there's something about understanding the impact that has when they find themselves very much alone, especially around about the age, Crick will say, and others will say around about 15 and a half, 16, where other girls are saying, I'm not doing this anymore. You know, I've maybe got a boyfriend, or they're starting to get into a relationship and they move away from it. So they have peer rejection. The internalising problems that they have, they get depressive symptoms, anxiety. This is where we begin to see the relationship between relational aggression in theory and mental health. So anxiety and depression. They say that there's an intense feeling of loneliness. It's actually not very nice being a relational aggressor, and it's certainly not nice being a victim of relational aggression. And what is the externalising? This is the ones that you see and I see. This is the ones that are there for everybody to see. There is such as delinquent behaviour, anger, number of school, it's American language, detentions. So there's a lot of ADHD, learning difficulties, etc., starts to emerge. And psychopathy and substance misuse. So some of that behaviour that we're seeing from our vulnerable and high-risk girls can be found under one of these labels. But for me, one of the most important ones of all this is this maladaptive personality characteristics. And if you look at that antisocial personality features, but there's one there that really screams out at me, and that is narcissism. A relational aggressor in your environments will believe that they are the only important person. Nobody else is important. It's only what they can get and what they want. And that is why they put things in place to get that objective met. And that's what makes them incredibly challenging, incredibly complex characters. And girls will say to me, I'll say to girls, why would you do that? Because I want to. Why? Because I just do. You're always hoping you get a wee bit more, but you tend to just have to be satisfied with those two responses most of the time. I just want to, because I do. So this whole narcissism is about this idea that they are the most important person. And that sometimes can become too much for the peers, and hence it goes back to the peer rejection. So let's look at the educational environment. Because relational aggression takes place mostly in the school setting, we say it interferes with student engagement and learning. So you might actually get a girl who's not engaging, and that becomes the focus, that she's not engaging, when in actual fact what you need to do is understand the why she's not engaging and start to ask some key questions. A wee tip, don't ask a girl what she thinks. She won't give you an answer. Ask her what she feels. She will give you an answer. Because the research again tells us that girls use emotion-focused styles, not thinking. So also, if you're doing group work in schools of anything, don't do group work with girls. They can't go into groups together. And that's what makes your challenge of having them in a classroom all the more admirable for me. School-based interventions for girls should focus primarily, and that's that point that I'm saying, on how they feel. If you say to most boys, not all boys, but if you say to boys, do you like school? And they'll say, yeah. You say, what do you like? And they'll say, I like maths and art. You say to a girl, how's school? Yeah, I like it. What do you like? Yeah, I like Mrs. Brown and Mr. McDonald's class. Yeah, they'll tend to tell you the person who's teaching it, that that's what they like, rather than the actual subject. So you've got a big responsibility in terms of understanding the relationships and how they get it. So let's hear it for the girls. This is a look at some of the self-harming behaviour now. Just have a wee look at my time. Yep. A strong message conveyed. This was research that was done by Dr. Susan Batchelor, who are at our Glasgow universities. And they did a piece of research with 800 girls between 13 and 16 years of age. So a right good number of girls. And when they were talking to them about some of their experiences of relationships and self-harm and relational aggression, they were saying that the girls themselves think that because there's so much focus on physical violence, particularly in schools, that in actual fact it masks the relational stuff. So because teachers, social workers, a lot of other people look at the physical, we miss out the fact that there's actually girls who are very, very anxious in their school environments, very anxious in their residential units. And as you know, secure care also has education, so they're very anxious in their educational environments in the school as well, in the units as well. So their experiences, they say, are potentially more hurtful and more damaging. And that's the point that I was making earlier in the slide about it just being as powerful as physical. I actually think it's more powerful for this reason, because it can be unrelenting. It can be a daily occurrence for a lot of girls in their environments. Verbal conflicts are a pervasive feature of girls' social worlds, occurring on an everyday, and for many they're a major source of anxiety. So let's look at Shinari for a second. Let's look at this idea of healthy and look at the mental well-being element of that. How does that operating with a major source of anxiety within our schools likely to affect how we engage in the education? It's bound to make it very, very difficult and not a very nice place to be. And when I travel, as I say, all over Scotland delivering my programme, teachers will say to me, actually don't have relational aggression in the policies, the bullying policies. They tend to admit, but they're going back and they are going to look at adding that. And that's all that, for the girls, that we could ask that be done. Teachers, and this is a wee bit that I want you just very somewhere in your head to think about how society views our girls. What is the language that we use? We heard John so rightly say that a lot of stuff becomes attention-seeking behaviour. And what's interesting that this was research done only with teachers, and they felt that girls should have been punished more harshly for demonstrating physical aggression than boys, because boys will be boys. But girls really shouldn't be doing that. And that brings back some of the idea that girls should be in the home, they should be taking care of the family, and it goes back to that attitude. What is society's attitude and views of where girls fit in? And in actual fact, what we're seeing more and more is girls emerging and taking on different roles within our society. But one very interesting point for me, it says here that the responses to male and female aggressive behaviour to change over time, reflecting changes in our societal views on gender normative behaviour. That was last year. Yeah? I find that really scary, that we're talking about something that might still change in the future about what we think of girls. So if we have got teachers who think that the girl who's physically aggressive should be dealt with more harshly, then we need to get rid of those attitudes to our girls, because what we do is we treat them differently based purely on their gender. We punish their gender. And by punishing their gender, we make it unfair for them. So we need to look at what our views are, our own views, but our professional views as well. And teachers who intervene appropriately and make it the bullying, they give the girls a message of being safe. Would you not like your classrooms to be safe places for learning? Of course you would. But the only way that you can do that is to create that safety, to make sure that your policies and your procedures and your actions challenge that. So the girl who's sitting there, I found it quite distressing to hear about the girl that sat with her coat on. I found that really distressing. But can I say that's not something that I'm not familiar with, working with vulnerable and high-risk girls? We often sit with some people who know the information when it's not enough people that know it. Because one difference, if that teacher had known that that girl was sitting there, she would never have sent her outside the door. She would have acted on it. The new legislation coming into Scotland next year, where you have the named person, I hope you are beginning to pick up, will make sure that we start to communicate much better, and we can all work to provide those safe environments for our girls. And they are our girls. They're our society's girls. So looking at this self-harming behaviour can be one of the most distressing and one of the most difficult things to work with. In insecure care in particular, the self-harming that goes on is absolutely horrendous. Horrendous. And people think that by locking girls up, that they're not going to self-harm. You would be really surprised at how they still get to self-harm. You can't make it a risk-averse environment. What is this self-harming, and how do we actual fact go about making sure that the girls have a way of expressing some of their pain and some of their difficulty without doing it against themselves? Children and young people, the ratio there is 4 times as many girls as boys, but that changes between the 18 and 19-year-olds. It falls down. It's just twice as many, but 4 times as many between that age up to the age of 18. And children and young people insecure are more likely to self-harm. I can say very confidently, with over 24 years of experience, there will be girls in your classrooms who will be self-harming. You may not notice it because of their uniforms. You may not notice it for a lot of reasons. But I can assure you there will be girls sitting in your classrooms, because self-harming doesn't just, again, happen if you're in a well-to-do school or a poor school. It doesn't discriminate. It's about the girls. It's about how the girls feel. Some people say it's attention-seeking behaviour. No, it's not. It's message behaviour. It's giving you a message, and you need to listen to what that message is. Many children and young people consider it. And have we ever actually looked at self-harming as a suicide prevention strategy? I think that's quite refreshing. When I speak to girls who self-harm, they tell me they feel alive. They can still feel pain. You know, girls who have been horrifically, sexually and physically abused at very young ages, they don't feel a lot. They've had that taken away. So that cut to their arm makes them realise that they can still feel pain. And if they can still feel pain, they can still cope. And what we need to be doing is start to thinking about self-harming just a wee bit differently. When the Good Shepherd first opened, it was an all-girls secure unit, the only in Scotland. I can tell you, not an easy place to work. One of the best things was the boys walking in the door on the 1st of July 2010. But the girls in the secure unit, we started to look at some data. We started to look at some of the reasons. And one of the things that we were asked to consider was at the point of admission to issue a self-harming kit. Yeah? It's like a wee first aid box. And in this first aid box is a new razor and Medi-wipes and Elastoplast. And the idea is that if they're going to self-harm, that they do so safely. We didn't do it. We just knew that wouldn't be something that was too far thinking all those years ago. But the most thing that leaves the scars on girls' arms is actually some infection. That is one of the things that leaves the scars. So if they can do it cleanly and without any risk of infection or minimise the risk of infection, then the longer term, actually better. But I can understand why people are extremely uncomfortable with the idea of issuing a self-harming kit. But nonetheless, it is fairly radical. So during adolescence, girls are 2 times more likely to suffer from depression. And again, we see this bit about what do we need to do then to look at that? And it's saying there that that's because of their life experiences. Girls really have had difficult life experiences, vulnerable and high-risk girls. And we need to look at how we can make that better for them. Not take it away, we can't, and we should never think that we can do that, because that's actually, for me, a bit offensive. They've had their experiences, and we need to go to where they are at in the journey of their life. So what's some of the gender differences? 2 minutes, so I'll just kind of rush through some of these. When we're talking about girls and working with girls tend to be about this self-based, and they tend to take a lot of things. It's about the image, it's about how do they look, and again, that's a society thing. And they tend to be about, you know, boys will be externalising problem solving, but girls will be about thoughts about themselves. And that links back into the emotion-focused coping style. You need to have strategies in your education systems and in your classrooms that allow for the exploration of the feeling for girls. As I say, get girls to link into their feelings and not their thoughts or their thinking, and you will start to begin to build very effective relationships with girls. If you see them as the same gender, only wear different clothes. Matthews and Hubbard tells us if you think that working with girls and boys, the only difference is that you remove the urinals and paint the walls pink, then you're in for a bit of a shock, because it's much more that's needed to be done. It's much more challenging. And they say again about the anxiety and depression, so we're seeing again that this is different researchers going ahead again and saying that the girls are most likely to suffer from anxiety and depression. At the age, during puberty, girls' confidence just slides right down to their toes. Slides right down to their toes. So you think about having all those things that we women experience growing up, some of the natural, maturational development that we went through. Maybe we had good parents, maybe we didn't. You add into that mix abuse. You add into that mix chaotic families. You add into that mix disruptive education. And you realise just the challenge that lies ahead for many of our young girls. So depression, etc., is not something that should come as a shock. So what next? Said it a few times, and I'll conclude by saying it. There needs to be policies across that look at relational aggression. How are we getting it right for our girls? And if we don't understand the role that some of this is playing on their development and on their mental health, then we will miss an opportunity to really develop effective ways of working with vulnerable and high-risk girls. Let's stop locking our girls up. Let's start being, and I say that as a deputy head of a secure unit, I think there are girls who are appropriately placed there at times, but I think that there are girls that we're asked to take in, and it's purely because there's nothing else, and nobody else knows what to do with them. So let's just put them there, and then they'll be okay. So we need to get policies. We need to work better. I'm just happy to be able to survive a room full of teachers when I'm a social worker, because normally the two don't actually meet very well. So there's an opportunity here, and GIRFEC and the New Children and Young Persons Act should be bringing us together for the sake of our children. Let's do that. And training, this is purely me, training for teachers training as well as social work training needs to include gender specific. The training programme that I've written is 2 days, and it's all about the brain. It's all about how we're engaging and not engaging. You've just got a snippet of what I believe as a practitioner are the key issues. So let's get it right for our girls, and let's use what we have available, which are really good resources, really good systems, really good frameworks, and let's move the girls' agenda forward. I'd like to thank you very much for your time. Thank you.